are on the beginning of another trip, heading back to Yarrabulla Creek Track. We've got the Pajero Sharon's with me today, so we should get some good filming done. Sam with his MUX, Sam's son with his Navara, Matt with the Prado, and Mark and Jared in Mark's Colorado today.
So here we are, airing down on the banks of Lake Buffalo, just south of Myrtleford. Nice early start today, decent frost around this morning after a pretty cold night. Yeah, you can see Lake Buffalo there, and in those shots airing down you could see Mount Buffalo just behind us, and just in the shot there from the GoPro on the vehicle now. So today we're heading down the eastern side of Lake Buffalo. It's basically mostly a two-wheel drive track until we get to the Yarrabulla Creek Track. Just a couple of washouts with a couple of little stream crossings, barely enough to get the rubber on your tyres wet. A large portion of the land that this track passes through is Crown land that's leased for grazing, so there are a couple of gates that are pretty much always shut when you get to them, because it is nearly always stock being run on this land. So as always, if you open the gate, close the gate, and you will see on the footage through here a couple of spots that look like cracking camp spots. There's one of those little dry creeks, very occasionally has some water in it, and you can see how much frost is still around. So as I was saying, like, you will see a couple of camp spots. As you might have seen on the gate there, you need to ring the leaseholder and organise camping in advance. So you can see he didn't want to really move off the track. The stock here are pretty used to vehicles, so take it slow and steady, and you really shouldn't have any issues. Half of them barely move at all when vehicles come along if you take it nice and slow and steady. Little fella there is not quite so sure of vehicles. And if you look ahead in the distance on this shot, you might see a couple of skippies making their way across the track. Probably depends whether you're watching this on a TV or on a handheld device as to whether you can actually make them out. And again, plenty of evidence there of that really heavy frost. So it had been pretty wet leading up to this. There's one of the areas down there by the river that would make for a great campsite. So yeah, by all means you can camp in here. You just need to make that phone call and book ahead, as I mentioned. With the rain that we'd had, we're fully expecting it was going to be fairly wet and probably a little muddy on the track, and we were not disappointed. So just heading out the other side of the leased area here with another set of gates. Always handy when you've got somebody else in the car with you to jump out and open the gates, and last one through will close the gate behind us. And yeah, here's another one of those little streamlets. A little bit rocky, so you don't want to hit them going too fast. They're never deep enough that you need to worry about how much water might be in them, at least not that I've ever seen. And this one's a little wider, so these are a little better than they have been in the past. I think a little bit more gravel's been added to the entry and exit to make that transition a little smoother. And coming out here from this track, that's the Goldie Spur track there on the left hand side, so that runs through to Buckland Valley, and on the right hand side here is the extension of the SEC track, which now is continuing up around to the right there. Straight ahead is the start of Yarrabulla Creek, and as you can see, we had a pretty good idea of what we're in for right from here. If you compare that to even the last video just couple of months ago, it's a very different thing. So yeah, Sam just helped me out there, get the winch cable out ready, so it's nice and high in case we need to grab it. And a lot of the water here has actually got ice still in place on the top of it in these bog holes. So yeah, nice firm base on those, not too difficult at all, and a nice way to start the track. So Sam bringing his MUX through. And now the nav. So the MUX and the nav are the only two running mud terrains. The rest of us are all running just all terrains. And the Prado and the Colorado are the only vehicles without a lift. So yeah, Matt's Prado is a Kakadu. I think in a previous video I called it a Sahara, but Toyota do change the naming. It's the top of the range Prado, and there's some challenges apparently around lifting those. He does have the height adjustable suspension in the rear though to give him a bit more clearance. And Mark's Colorado is stock suspension, so probably the lowest clearance vehicle out of all the vehicles along on the trip today. So after that initial bog hole, we followed the track through, and you can see there were a few people camping up here up ahead just at the start of the track. Hopefully we didn't disturb them too much coming through reasonably early. It was probably about 8 AM when we're coming through. Might have been 8:30. And yeah, into the start of the track proper. And yeah, as we said before, this track doesn't get heaps of traffic, so it is a little overgrown in places, particularly right near the start here. And it's not too far along before we hit the first fork, where the right hand option actually takes you to that large bog hole that you saw Sam drive in his MUX last time. None of us wanted to tackle that this time, given how much wetter the track was. So we've all opted, so this is the fork that I'm talking about just here, we've all opted for the left hand alternate line, which was wet enough and muddy enough on its own. This was the first taste of things to come. And you can see there in the centre a few marks in the mud where diffs have been dragged. It's one of the advantages with the independent suspension vehicles. You do have plenty of clearance underneath, even just with a 2-inch lift and 33s. You don't have that diff.
Go through if you want to go through.
Matt bringing his Prado through, and again, even without a lift, he's had no issues there.
Who needs a lift kit? Nicely done, mate. Nicely done.
And the Colorado's coming through next. So Mark, knowing he doesn't have heaps of clearance, he's opted to span that, and he's been able to keep his line up on top of those ruts and made it through there with no issues at all. Now this section is a little more torn up than it was even when we were last here just a couple of months ago. And as you can see, there's plenty of water on the track. A lot of these having driven this track a few times, a lot of these I was pretty comfortable. I had a fair idea how deep they may or may not be and what condition the base might be in, so a lot of these we just drove straight into. And again, just water everywhere on the track at this particular time. And yeah, if you've got the inclination of the time, by all means check out the last Yarrabulla Creek video that we posted. That one was cut short due to some mechanical issues with the Pajero that ended up being a wheel bearing and some suspension bushes. As you can see there, 3 different options on how to tackle this section. I just opted for the right hand lane, and everybody ended up following suit as well. Plenty wet, but not too deep, and a reasonably firm base underneath it. You just don't always know that that's what you're going to get though. So MUX and Navarro making that through with no issues at all. And Matt bringing his Prado through soon after. Now at this point I was already starting to wonder, there's a couple of fairly muddy obstacles that I knew about that would be coming up that we didn't actually get to last time we drove this track because we turned around. And I was really starting to think about what kind of condition they might be in and how challenging it may or may not be to get through this particular time, so you'll see when we get there. And yeah, Mark's brought his Colorado through again with no issues. Slow and steady. Again, we've got one of those forks in the track, left or right. This particular time, again, I've opted for the right hand lane. It looked a little more interesting. And it wasn't too long before I came around the corner and found this. So I really had no idea how deep that might be or how soft it might be. So again, this is one of the times where I've actually gotten out and checked the bottom, and it was good that I did. Found this small tree sort of down, nothing you couldn't have driven over, but probably would have ended up scratching the side of the car, so I thought it best to get rid of that. Didn't want to go into the bush there, so tossed it to the cameraman. And again, you can see before we've come through there, the ice still formed on the top of that water. And yeah, this wasn't particularly deep, but you don't always know, and when the bog holes are that long, it doesn't hurt to check that out in advance. If it's deeper or softer than you expect, things can go pear-shaped fairly quickly. And of course we weren't disappointed. There was plenty more water and mud on the track. Most of it had a really good solid base and was easy enough just to drive through. Now this section here is pretty much where we pulled up on the last trip and pulled the wheel off the Pajero. As I said, it was a lot drier then, and right here where we are now is where I turned around and we headed back. So for most of the guys from this point on, they've never driven this track, and I was pretty excited for them to see what was up ahead. I knew full well there was a really muddy rutted section coming up, and here we are. There's two distinct paths through this, so there's the path there straight ahead, and then there's the left-hand path. Both have their pluses and minuses. The left-hand path has the muddier entry, and that's it there. Probably slightly deeper ruts, but more clearance if you want to try and span it and sit up on top of those ruts. The other side has less room and you pretty much have to drive them. So I've elected to take the left-hand line, having driven that way many times before. And made it through that initial section, no issues. And decided to sit up on top of the ruts, spanning the left-hand rut. And you can see that small tree just down across part of the track there, and I've been able to navigate around that. If I was a little more considerate, I probably should have pulled up and removed that for my fellow trip participants. And as you can see, this is quite a long section of train track style ruts with a softer, boggier exit out the backside. Throwing a little bit of mud up there as we come out, and all done. So let's see how the rest of the guys go through that section. Next up's the nav. And again, everybody pretty much followed the same line that I took. It's one of those things, once you've seen somebody do it, it gives you a bit more confidence that that's the way to go. And he's just ended up with his right hand tyre there, dropped down in that far side rut. And Matt's bringing his Prado up behind as well. And with that small tree down on the right hand side of the track, he's trying to get the nav back up on top of the ruts and drive around it the same way I did. But as is often the case when it's wet, muddy, getting the tyres to climb up out of those ruts is easier said than done. So he's managed to get the front wheels up there, and so now he's going to hope the back ones follow suit. And instead he's ended up with the front right and the left rear both in the same rut, and crab walking it along. So at that point, not a lot of options but to get out and actually clear the small tree off the track there. And that lets him straighten up and drive the rest of it. So yeah, the front end just dropped in there, and plenty of clearance on that thing for him to just take it out. And already you can see how soupy that mud on the exit there is getting, and that's just the second vehicle through. So Matt's got plenty of clearance there on his Prado, and he's elected to sit up on top again. That front wheel's dropped in. So he's running with his right hand tyres there in the left hand rut, and the left hand tyres up on the bank before he's been able to get back up and then span it nicely, climbing up out of the rut there. So nice and slow and steady, not wanting to risk bellying out and needing a recovery or winch to get out of there. He's taking it nice and steady and spanning that left hand rut. And that's probably one of the key things, is know your vehicle and choose the line that suits your driving style and your vehicle. The best way to avoid getting in any strife on the tracks, if you're out there wheeling with somebody and they're running 35s and a 3-inch lift and you're not, maybe consider whether if you take the same line as them exactly, or whether there's an alternate line that suits your vehicle a little better.
Nicely done.
And yeah, that mud's getting soupier every vehicle that comes through it. Unfortunately, he didn't give that any more gas than he did, otherwise I'd have ended up covered in mud. So time for the Colorado. Sam hung back with his MUX just in case we needed to recover the Colorado from behind, being the only vehicle that doesn't actually have a winch. And Mark's just taking that same line there, and as you can see there, he's just had a little bit of a clearance issue. So close to just driving straight through that, but he's just bellied out there slightly. He is able to sort of backwards and forwards a little bit to try and clear that, so he's only just sort of hung up. And each time he's going backwards and forwards there, he's making a little bit of progress. So nice and patient, not overly spinning those wheels. He's just found out there that closing the window might be an idea. And that last little bit, that's got him up and out. And knowing he's already had clearance issues, he was definitely going to take the line where he was able to sit up and span that. He's dropped that back tyre in, but again, like the others, he's been able to climb that back out. You can see the mud dropping off his diff there. Definitely the lowest hanging part of the underside of his car. But he's got himself a good line there, spanning that rut nicely and making his way here down towards the end of this section. So again, nice and slow and steady. He's holding that line really well and keeping his all four wheels up out of the ruts, so he's got no clearance issues and able to make his way nice and comfortably back out. Nicely done. And last but not least, Sam's bringing his MUX through on that same left-hand line. Just eased his way in. Plenty of clearance on that with his 2-inch lift. And again, he's opted to span that rut and drive up on top of it. Nicely done. Now, just taking the corner there, you can see his back tyres have just
He's in
slipped down into the rut. So at that point, no other option but to drive it. Nice and slow and steady, just basically idling his way through there. One thing, see that little opening there on his MCC bull bar that he's got? That's a little grill that opens and allows him to access the clutch handle on his winch. I'll tell you what, I wish my ARB bar had something like that, because accessing the clutch handle on my winch is just about impossible. So yeah, quite a good little design innovation. That's something to think about. You know, when you're putting winches on bars, you know, are you going to have access to that? Was not something I was conscious of when I got the ARB bar installed on my car, and it has been an issue sort of ever since. I rarely use the winch on free spool because it's just so hard to reach in and engage and disengage the clutch. So not too far after that section, we come to this section, which I also knew was coming up, and as you can see, it's quite rutted. Now, this track changes markedly year from year, so I was just taking the centre line. That's sort of where I've always approached this from. It generally gives you options. The ruts here, though, are much deeper than they have been in previous years when I've driven this track. And by the time I got down here and realised what was in front of me, I didn't have a lot of options. I actually couldn't get the tyres up out of there. Now that bog hole, I have driven it before, which probably, as you'll see, gave me a little bit of false confidence. So while the wiser heads in the group were suggesting backwards was the way to go, I've said, no, I want to go forwards and I want to have a crack at driving this. So the first issue, as you can see there, was actually even just getting into the bog hole. I've literally just bellied out, sitting on that large middle bash plate. So no traction going forwards. Try and moving the tyres left to right. That's really not helping or making any difference whatsoever at all. And going backwards much the same. So hoping to avoid a full-on recovery. Opted for the Max Tracks. They've been really handy in a number of situations. Certainly a bit of kit I've been pretty happy that I've invested in. And I actually think they're easier to access with that new bracket sitting up on an angle at the front of the rack there. Leaves me a lot more space on the rack than if the Max Tracks were laying down along the length of the rack, and really doesn't make a lot of difference to the fuel economy. So I think I'll be leaving them on that bracket for some time. So there wasn't a lot of room under there. With the car bellied out, it was pretty hard to actually get the tracks in under the wheels. But the guys have managed to shoehorn a track, and you can see the rock there in the background being moved off the track. So you've always got to be conscious of stuff like that gets chucked into the ruts on the tracks for people to try and get traction. So yeah, the guys have just managed to wedge them under the front of the rear tyres. Not a long way in, but just enough that I can get some traction on those rear tyres, and all it takes is a little bit of traction and the thickness of the tracks, and we're mobile, albeit not for long. So yes, the mud in that bog hole was deep and soft, and we're going nowhere. I think some in the group might have predicted that that was exactly what was going to happen. And for this video, that is where we're going to leave it. This was a really fun trip, great bunch of people along. Here's a view of that same entry just from the onboard GoPro, and that's that. So lots more to come on this trip, so thanks for watching. Like this video if you liked it, leave a comment down below. I always enjoy reading those. Yeah, next video will probably be another variety trip video before we come back to the second part of this. So coming up after this is a little bit of a snapshot of what you can look forward to in part 2 of this video. See you in the next one.
You want to try it here? I reckon, yes, do.